you can see that a lot of businesses fail within the first 3 years. And that's a combination of the stress, the money, or the lack of all of this, and then the lack of support.
So thanks for joining us. Before this video, you've probably seen the tour of Clinikin up in Yorkshire, UK. If you haven't, go ahead and have a look at that video before coming back to this. If you've watched the tour of Clinikin UK, then you know what that's about. And today we're going to sit down with the founders of Clinikin and hear the journey of how the clinic came about.
I'm Mallappa Kolar. I'm a consultant plastic surgeon, and I basically did my medical school and most of my training in the UK, but I've done like multiple international fellowships and always been really interested in the business of medicine as well. I think it's something that's completely lacking in the education system in the UK. And I've always wanted to look at essentially a way of controlling the direction of my life, the professional directions of my life. Thankfully, I met my wife who has the same sort of like mindset, and that's really helped us to be able to both brainstorm as well as develop this concept plus other things that we're working on. So it's taken a few years, but we've brainstormed together, we've built it together, and we're making it successful together.
Hi, I'm Karuna Kolar, and I own Clinikin. He works for me. I come from marketing and events background, and this is a joint venture. We've been working on it for a long time, 6 years to be precise, before we actually started building Clinikin, brick and mortar building. But it's been a journey, a challenging one, but I think we're starting to enjoy it more now.
Amazing. So Mallappa and Karuna Kolar, the founders of Clinikin. It's so amazing to be sitting here with you, and I'm really keen to dive into the story of what Clinikin is all about. You said you started 6 years ago, and we've had a look at what Clinikin looks like. We've seen that you do GA procedures, but give us a full width of what Clinikin is right now. What's your footfall like? How many patients do you get? Just tell us all.
So currently, Clinikin is in the GA facility. We have beds where patients can recover. We do have the capability of having overnight recovery, and broadly we've got a surgical part to it, and then the more consultation outpatient type part to it. Things are really picking up, especially this month and then the month after, where we have one and potentially second breast and body plastic surgeon operating and consulting. Then there's myself who does the facial cosmetics. We've got ophthalmology, so there's like 3 clinicians, and they're going to be starting on 3 clinics a week and theatres as well. And we've got, in the background, we've got 2 orthopedic surgeons. We've got another 2 or 3 hand surgeons as well. So it's footfall wise, I suppose we're getting, essentially it works out at around, 15, 20 inquiries a week. And we get about, around 5 patients that book in to see us, and then the conversion rate is similar to that. So there's about 5. Most of them convert onto having a procedure done with us. There's a mix of things that we do. So there's a lot of minor procedures, and then there's also the bigger cosmetic type of procedures. The ophthalmology stuff is starting, so we can't give you an accurate idea of that yet, but the vast majority in terms of flow is outpatient, like minor lumps and bumps kind of removals, consultations and removals. So because I do a lot of work everywhere else as well, a lot of cosmetic work, initially it was running at around once a week, but we're getting it up to 2 times a week. So I tend to work there Friday and Saturday. So it's around 4 to 5 patients a week for what I do. And then like the breast surgeons is about 1 to 2 a week. And then for myself, like the cosmetic stuff, it's about, again, 1 to 2 a week. Broadly, it would work out to up to 10 patients for the plastic surgery side of things, split amongst about three days.
That's amazing. I think I should mention that your job also kind of you do a lot more than just the plastic surgery, both of you. So you're traveling at the moment. So thanks for making the time. And I think this is a really useful conversation because you're not like a massive hospital and you're not in just the idea phase. You're just at that right moment where things have systematized, you've got a flow and things are steady. And yet early enough in your memory for us to kind of dive into some of the details and specifics of the challenges and everything else to give the viewers more information about that. So I want to dive into some of those bits, if that's okay. I think I want to start with talking about what the business structure of Clinikin is like. Is it a limited company? Is there a different structure to it? And what do people who are setting up their clinics need to know about registering a clinic as a company?
So Clinikin is a limited company, and I think that's the best way to set it up as. But depends, if you have partners, then you set it up with a partnership. But at the moment, then where I'm the sole owner, so it's a limited company.
Private limited
All
company.
right.
Private limited.
So the other option is obviously the limited liability partnerships, which a lot of groups tend to do. So one of the considerations we had when we were doing this is that we wanted someone to be solely looking after the business side of things, because it's good to have a group of clinicians working together, but I think it's still important to bear in mind at the end of the day, you need to have someone who's got the time to devote to develop the business side of things. If a clinician's happy to sacrifice that part and then be the main driver for the business side, then that's great. But because we had a very particular vision for what Clinikin is and what we wanted to achieve. So we thought that in these early phases, it's a private limited company is probably the most sensible route. But we have had discussions before and since to join other limited liability partnerships. But from what we see, when there's a lot of people involved, then there's a lot of opinions, and then trying to get a consensus to make a decision, that kind of hinders the ability of like a private company to be able to grow, especially in the early phases. I think it's important that, one person takes ownership and then drives it. Everyone else supports them. Trying to get too many opinions at the start, I think, is a bit of a mistake.
Yeah, and I think being a clinician myself and imagining many clinicians watching this, they probably can imagine what the clinical role might be: to see the patients, to book them in for clinics, have your secretary follow them up, do the pre-op assessments and pre-anesthetic checks, and then operate on them and book them in for a follow-up. I think that's something we're quite familiar with. But Karuna, could you tell us more about what the business development side looks like? What are those things that you've had to teach Mallappa with him being the clinician?
Well, to be honest, at the beginning, it was mainly the marketing side of things. You can, infrastructure wise, I think it gets built up and set up very quickly. But the marketing side of things becomes very important, because that's your daily footfall that's where it's going to come from. If your marketing is on point, then you'll get the patients coming in. But to be honest, there's no right way or wrong way of doing marketing. It depends on a lot of external factors, and obviously marketing is expensive as well, so it really depends on your finances, how that looks like. So that's probably been one of the things that I've had to talk Mallappa through, right? And in terms of the other things, it would have been probably like the patient side of things. I mean, not obviously he's the expert clinician. He knows what happens and what the patients want. But in terms of like the flow and the journey that the patients take, and how we need to cater to them, their personalized experiences, and just the experience that they have around the clinic when they come in to the moment they leave. So those are one of the things that we've been planning together and saying, they have to have this sort of a journey with us.
So how much of that are you able to kind of modify versus how much of that is governed by regulations? Because I know that previously we saw the check-in book, for example, that CQC and other regulations require you to have. So are there certain things that are governed, and how much flexibility do you have to introduce your own way of doing things when it comes to patient flow?
Well, we do have to keep a lot of like GDPR and the regulations in mind, but there are certain things you can't get away from. For instance, you can do a logbook, but you can also do a more expensive version, which is having a digital pad there to log your patients in. From my perspective, a lot of it is guidance, and you can work around whatever guidelines are put down, and you can work on it based on what your vision is and what you want to do as a clinic and as a business. So it's always important to think about from the patient's perspective as well as your own, thinking about how you would like to be treated when you are going to a private setting and paying money to see someone. So thinking about it from that perspective is always helpful and gives you a good idea of what to implement.
The other aspect of that is that it's important to bear in mind there are some guidelines, but there are also some rules. Essentially, typically most NHS type facilities try to adhere to the minimum standards required. Whereas what we've tried to do, and what I think setting up a private facility of your own gives you the opportunity to do, is actually to optimize each one of those things. So you can try and do it to the best degree. So, you can have a paper version, but we have an iPad. It adds to the GDPR, it adds to the experience, it adds to that premium kind of like feel, in the waiting room and things like that, which I'm sure the viewers have seen on the videos. The chairs need to be cleanable, they need to be wipeable. They need to be like low risk of contamination and things like that. So you can get it in like the more generically available colors and the generically available materials, or you can spend a little bit more. Yes, it does cost more, but we think it enhances the actual experience by looking at like really viable alternatives. So, there's two ways that I think you could think of like the way you build a private healthcare facilities. One is to go to the cheapest possible, or you can go to the most expensive version. Obviously, when you go to the top end, there's no limit as to how much you can spend, so you have to be sensible. But we veered towards the more expensive end of things. Expensive in the sense that it's not over the top, but it is probably at the more luxury scale of things. So which means patients feel a little bit more special, and as do we when us and our staff come to work as well.
All right. Yeah, that's really cool. I think it was really eye-opening to see how simplistically good Clinikin was. I think getting behind the scenes for me especially made it all seem very doable. I think the whole idea of having this conversation is to make it seem doable at multiple different levels for all of the people listening to this. So I think let's go back. Like you said, it's been in existence for 6 years, but take us back even further. When was the first time you had the idea for Clinikin, and what did that look like, and how did it iterate along the way?
So originally it started off with like I was ST3, and one of my consultants that I was working with, he left the NHS. I was his last registrar. So he set up his own facility, and I was just like thinking that is possible, And from there on, it was kind of then exploring it. So I tend to be the type of person who, if you find a possibility, you try and take a really deep dive into it, and then try and see what is the best you can do. What's the best version of everything, and that started at the start of like registrar training. Initially, before that, I did a PhD, and there my aim was like I said, I really would like to aim towards trying to get a Nobel Prize. Obviously, that's pie in the sky kind of thing, but that was my aim. But then when I met Karuna, we kind of shifted focus, and it was very much like there's nothing wrong with the academic side. I just found it was quite cutthroat in a different way, and I thought like at least this way I get to do stuff that I like, which is the surgery, patient care, and outcomes and things like that in a clearly measurable time frame, which is part of the joy of being a surgeon. So you can see almost instantaneous results, but we don't have cheap tastes in general. It was like, let's try and do things the best we can, and let's look at what's the most luxurious version that we can create of this on our budget. So that started like right at the start of registrar training, and then constantly gathering bits of information. We'd always be talking about various bits that we'd learned, what we'd seen, what we'd noticed, and seen what we can kind of really almost kind of like store in our minds. So we'd be making like little notebooks, we'd be making mental notes and things like that, and then aiming to pull that together. And then I think that the closer it got to the end of training, we were thinking like, right, we need to kind of get on with it. So that's when we kind of took it into overdrive. We looked for sites, when we looked into the regulatory requirements that are there at that time, because obviously they get updated on a regular basis as well. So we needed to satisfy those regulatory requirements at that time that we set it up.
So we were going back to finding where we wanted to set up. We always had a picture in our minds before we actually set it up, and we used to spend weekends driving around areas trying to look at what's available. We used to always keep an eye on what is being real estate that's being sold, and if we liked something, we would go and drive around that area to see how feasible it is and whether it looks nice, and if there's
Access.
if there's access and things like that. So yeah, we did a lot of driving around in the week.
How long were you in that phase where you were saving up and looking at places and saving up and looking at places?
We spent about 2 years actually.
Yeah.
So 2 years of I'd be, every time before I go to bed, I'd be going onto commercial sales websites and looking at land for sale and then buildings for sale. And our original plan was actually to build from the ground up. So we had chats with architects, informal chats. We knew architects and stuff like that. So having chats with them, having chats with finances, having chats with actual builders as well, and then looking at other people who've built high spec facilities, essentially where they have to have ultra clean air and things like that. One of Karuna's cousins is an engineer, so he builds ultra clean facilities for pharma. So we'd have deep discussions about that. But yeah, a lot of it, we knew the price per acre in most parts around our bit, and we knew all the different prices that it should be. So we educated ourselves. So we weren't kind of diving in naive. And then even speaking to other business owners, because we started to reach out to business owners and say, look, this is what we're thinking of doing, and to kind of get their opinion, plus also to kind of get a little bit of guidance from them as well. So it was a combination of different bits, because we thought, again, part of the naivety, and especially me as a doctor, was just build it and they'll come, which is completely not true. So Karuna kept telling me that that's wrong, and I was like, I don't think so. I think it'll be fine here. But I was obviously completely wrong on my part. But the point is, we thought we've gone.
Sorry, you were saying?
I was just saying, I was imagining you climbing on top of a hill, like a little hill, and planting a flag and saying, here, we shall build it here.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what it was.
That's exactly what we've done. Just that there's no hill there, but there's a pine forest right there, overlooking a
So
pine
what
forest.
was the moment when all of that discovery, all of that research work, when was it that you decided to just commit and invest and make that decision to just go for it? What was it that led to that change?
So essentially, I finished my FRCS during COVID. I got the results 4 or 5 days before the first lockdown in the UK. So I didn't get to celebrate that. I had I had quite a few really good quality international fellowships that I could have gone on. And none of them happened, So I remember thinking at that stage that I don't realistically think that I can draw out the fellowships any further on the other end. You don't know when the fellowships are going to restart. I can't put my life on hold. At that stage, our son was only a few years old. And it was I've already spent a lot of time training. I was 39 finishing training. And I was like, I need to get on with it. My in-laws are a business background, and they'd constantly be saying to me when you're going to finish training to be a doctor, and when you're going to be an actual doctor. And I was like, yeah, I know, tell me about it. It's coming. But so yeah, I remember that kind of stuff, and it was right during COVID, whenever all those fellowships collapsed, I was just right, we need to just get on with it. So interestingly, my brothers are they do property development and things like that. So we asked for their help if they can find anyone else that they knew to be able to find good properties. We wanted to be out in the countryside. We didn't want to be in a city centre. We want to be in a beautiful setting, because we think that these things make a difference to the patient's experience. So yeah, one of my brothers found it. We went to visit it, and then we had a few chats initially with the landlord, and then we had to delay things whilst we were then collecting the money, and then kind of like work from there.
We had to delay things also because of COVID, because it was that year, which was quite a year. I don't think anyone would have expected that. Delayed building and set up for a year, and then the following year we started. I think December 2020 is when we actually just dived in and said, okay, we just have to do it now. Before we lose this amazing site that we found, we need to dive in, because the landlord was kind enough to actually wait for us for a year.
Any top tips, like maybe 2 or 3 top tips for when it comes to picking a site for running your clinic?
I would say look at a place that has a considerable amount of footfall or visibility, and also has I know parking is a premium, but if you can look at a place that has easy access to parking, it's a good one. I know, because why I say visibility is important is because that just takes away that little bit of pressure when you look at marketing and things like that. So you don't have to spend silly amounts to make yourself visible if you are not. Yeah, that would be my top tip.
I think mine is actually like, it's figuring out what's the long-term aim. So I love strategy. I love to be able to like actualize. And for me, it's like, what did I eventually want to get to? So is this clinic it? Is this all that we're going to try to get to? If it is, fine. Then it's like having it in a relatively small site with easy visibility, but there'll be limited chance for expansion. There'll be limited chances for extra services and things like that. So I think for me, it's about thinking, what do you want to achieve? What do you as a clinic owner want to be your ideal scenario? Okay. So figure out what you want to achieve, and then it's like, how much can I spend, or how much can I afford to do this for? How much can I afford to support this for? Okay. So realistically, you doing it as whatever branch of medicine you practice, what is feasible for you to be able to earn? If it's something that's, if they both link up, then I think is then finding out, is your target realistic in the more expensive end, or do you have to kind of scale down, which isn't a problem, but there's workarounds around that.
And for someone who's super early in this journey, could you give us a feeler of what that earning potential could look like for various kinds of clinicians? So someone who's maybe just doing a consultation clinic, all the way to like super expensive GA knee replacements, for example.
So just to give you an idea, the consultations on average, so there's a lot of variation. One of the things, there's a lot of geographical variation with the pricing. So, low population densities, obviously, they tend to charge less. And obviously, where there's a lot more competition, then there tends to be a bigger variation in pricing. But some people do charge £50. Some people are free for a consultation. But on average, it's around, £100 to £200 for a consultation. The length of the consultation varies depending on the speciality and what you need to do. Because if it's mainly a consultation type of clinical branch, so one of the medical branches, for example, then most of the earning comes through that. Especially when it's like mainly outpatient based, people can be turning over a good few thousand per day. So if it's surgery, then again, it depends as to how much is covered by insurance, how much is self-pay, and what's the relative demands. So, say for example, like general surgery, where there's a lot of hernias, gallbladders and things like that. If it's self-pay, especially in the bigger cities, then they can charge a good few £1,000s per procedure. For knee replacements, like the orthopedic surgeons are some of the highest earners, so they can charge, the facility charges roughly 14 to 18,000, and they get a decent amount of that. Obviously, each one of those is negotiable with the individual clinician and things like that. And then from cosmetic surgery, like extremely high-end premium ones, like the facelifts, we charge £25,000 for one of those. But there are colleagues that I know who do charge 60. The same type of procedures in America. It's a different market, but just to give you an idea, they charge you like $250,000. They deliver good, really, really good results. So, that's not kind of like having a go. But again, if you're in the early stages of your journey and you're thinking about it, it gives you something to aim for. I need to be the best in my field. Then essentially those people can charge a huge premium. And that's relevant for each speciality as well. But the facilities themselves, there's quite a variety. In general, you tend to see that when they run well and they run for a significant amount of time, good reputation, then there's hundreds of thousands of pounds that people can be turning over per month.
What I'm realizing is with those numbers, the image of it being like an absolutely packed schedule and an absolutely packed list, the way it is in the NHS, is not the way that this needs to run. And that gives you the headspace to be able to bring in your own experience and your own values and the way you want to do things. And it seems not difficult, really, in terms of making the business viable and profitable, is it?
It is once the business stabilizes, yes. The difficulty is those first 3 years. That's when everything is very unstable. But we think that by sticking to your guns and sticking to the right principles, as long as you can sustain it, then yeah, you can. We tend to give like half an hour. To be honest, I for my facelifts, I give them an hour-long consultation. You just can't do that in the NHS. And I think that's where it helps for many reasons. One is you develop a bond with the patient, so the patient, they either vibe with you or they don't. If they don't, it's fine, but at least you can make a more balanced judgment. Whereas when you're time pressured, then it's like 10, 15 minutes. You have to tell the patient everything. You have to judge them. They need to judge you in essence. And then you need to kind of like carry on from there. So it's very, very difficult to make all those assessments in such a short space of time. And then we can then choose to say, look, we need to, as a standard in cosmetic surgery, we do the cooling off period. So you have 2 weeks between the first and second consultations. But we do add in others as well. If there's any questions, then we can respond to them in a timely manner. We can be very specific about it. So it's not like it's wishy-washy. And I think, yeah, you define you get to define what you want to do. And you get to define the pathway that you want the patients to have. Because if you think that, I think I can explain everything in half an hour, I'm completely fine, I don't need any more, fine, great. If you're someone who needs an hour and a half to be able to discuss the same thing, that's fine. But you get to choose that, and you obviously, especially if you own the facility, you charge accordingly, So, but it's also a self-selecting group of patients that you then attract, So if the patients want quick responses, low fees, and everything like that, then they go to certain facilities, which is, again, it's fine. People are a range. You need to cater for that range. But I think it's important that you, as a business, figure out where along that spectrum you want to be. What's going to be your niche part of that? I think, especially in the early phases, trying to cater for everything is completely unrealistic, unless you've got huge amounts of money to like bankroll you. But at the same time, there are people I know who've spent a lot of money and they haven't been able to achieve that either. So there is a balance between doing it and being savvy enough to realize what's happening.
Yeah. So I guess when you think about those kind of places where people have invested lots of money and are struggling to be successful and be profitable in the way they run their clinic versus the way you've done Clinikin, what are some of the pitfalls that you've managed to avoid or perhaps even learned the hard way?
I think it's really simple, to be honest. Earn more than you spend. So in essence, that's the basis of it, isn't it?
Okay.
So we've tried to make sure that you can look at alternatives. For example, how you're buying the equipment, where you're buying the equipment, what you try to do for it. Whereas some people may pay a premium in the mistaken belief that, they don't have to worry about it after that. And I think that's a really, really big part of it. Building the facility, you can negotiate. I think, again, in being a medic and working in the NHS, you almost work on the assumption that this is what it is. You tell them, you agree, and you just carry on. You don't really negotiate. Business needs negotiation. You can't just accept the first price. So there's that part. So that's the outgoings. And then obviously finding the right people to work for you, paying them a fair amount, don't try to undercut it. but be fair, but don't go over the top either. Then it's also, then you need to find people to come in. And I think we managed to do the outgoings quite well. I think, the pricing that we managed to get was pretty decent, but the big problem we had was the patient acquisitions, and that was
It took a bit of time to figure out.
Yeah, it took us years. It took us years, multiple different attempts, multiple different companies, agencies, us doing bits, getting them to do bits and things like that. So it took us a long time. Even with Karuna's background in marketing, there's different elements that we didn't know.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Even you didn't know.
Yeah. Getting around digital marketing is quite, how would you put it? It's a whirlwind. There's so many things to it, and it's hard to get your head around it.
Yeah, it also feels like a thing that is probably really big for us to cover in this episode, but I think we'd be keen to talk about it, especially in the in-person event we're going to be having in September at Clinikin. So we'll leave the link for that in the description. So anybody listening to this who's interested to find out more about Clinikin and how to start their own clinic, hear about how to overcome the marketing hurdle behind patient acquisition, do join us. It's free to attend. We've got lots of sponsors coming to that event as well. But I want to go back to this bit. So we've reached this point now in 2020 where you've made the decision that, like, F it, we just got to do it. You've got a location, you've got the money together. What's the first thing you do? Is it literally continue just building it and hope they come? Or is it a website? Or is it CQC regulation? Is it a catalog of all the services? Is it partners? Where do you start? Where do you even begin?
I think we did all of those things that you mentioned simultaneously, because from the building's perspective, one of the good things was our landlord. All credit goes to him, because he knew exactly what to do. That I think, to be honest, we got very lucky with, because he did it to an amazing, like a really high standard and high spec. But then the other things with the regulations and things like that, we started working on all of them at the very beginning, the moment we realized what it was and what it needed.
You mean like the flooring being of the right material, and then the paint being cleanable, and the surfaces being appropriate, all of those bits? Okay.
Yes.
And then in terms of the regulation, who were the first few places you contacted? I'm assuming CQC is going to be one of them.
Yeah.
No, so the CQC you can't do until you built it, you see. So you need to be able to take photos to show the place and things like that.
But we did do the application.
No, yeah, we did. We asked for the application, but you can't finish the application, and you can't arrange for an inspection and authorization until after it's been built. So you're kind of limited. So you do have to, unfortunately, suck it up and have to, it's net out at that point. But the marketing we were trying to work on at the same time, because Karan has done a lot of the marketing stuff in India. And I think the turnover times are much quicker there, whereas here it's, so obviously a much smaller population. There's a much smaller pool of potential patients. So the lag time is significantly longer. So you start something, but it can take a lot of months before it actually kicks into actually having any tangible positive effects. So, seeing the first patient, it takes a lot longer than you'd think.
Okay, so you start doing, so you set up a company, you've got somebody building the location, you're waiting for that to happen till you can speak to CQC. What else do you do? I know you've got a list of trusted partners that have helped you with a lot of the facilities. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
That bit. So obviously we had an idea of what services we wanted to offer. So based on that, we were looking at all the suppliers for various bit of equipment and kit that we need within the clinic, in terms of providing the actual surgery, whatever we need in our theaters, in the consultation rooms, and all of that. There we started speaking to various providers and suppliers and things like that to just start getting all the quotes and understanding what they all actually in the end cost, because a lot of these suppliers and providers, they don't put their pricing upfront on their website. It's always about call us for a quotation and things like that. So getting all of that organized and starting to negotiate with all those people, that was what we were trying to do as well simultaneously.
It's also learning that, so there's HTM, so there's different guidelines, the technical manuals as to what you have to do. Some of them are guidances, some of them are legal requirements. So it's a different part that essentially it lays the basis for which the CQC would, pass, fail, etc., the different grading systems. So we had to read through them ourselves to understand it. At least this is the approach we took. I know others at clinics have kind of gone to the suppliers and say, tell me what I need to have. But we kind of took the opposite approach where we were just like, no, we want to understand it, because then it gives us a lot more leverage when we're negotiating and say, well, actually, we don't need to do that. And what you're saying is you're exaggerating that, essentially, which again, as a doctor, it's very difficult to say, because you'll be like, oh God, I can't offend patients and stuff like that, which, completely understand. But when you're running business, it's a different mindset where you essentially cut through the fluff quickly.
So
You
use
don't
the
have
same
time.
doctor mindset to be like critically analyzing the guidelines and the recommendations and differentiate what's a rule and what's a necessity.
Yeah. I think using our good judgment as well.
Yeah.
What's
So the HTMs basically provide the basis for what you need to try to do. So that's including the sizes of the rooms, the regulatory, the ventilation, the air changes, the flooring. So that each one has a different HTM. So we read through it and we wanted to really understand it, because then we can chat to the different companies. Because typically what you find is that as soon as you say wedding, you say medical, then the prices just jump up. So we were like, no, we're not paying the premium just because we're saying we're medical. So we wanted to look at, it's the same standards, if not slightly higher, actually, than some of the medical suppliers. But we looked at alternative people that we could speak to. And interestingly, a lot of them were like, oh, we haven't done anything medical like that. But yeah, we can provide it at those requirements, at those levels. So you're not going to not pass. So, and interestingly, by the end of it, when we did give all the information to the CQC, they were like, yeah, this is better. This is like a really, really high standard, isn't it?
Yeah, this is better than most we inspect and regulate.
So you build it and then you go to CQC and you say, CQC, please check what we've built. Is it up to the mark for your standards and your requirements? Is that right? And so CQC are there to kind of judge both this facility, like the physical things in the premises, but also the services you provide. Is that right? And how do they kind
They
of
don't
check the services?
they don't check the services. You tell them what you're aiming to provide. So it's like, we said it's like consultations for surgery and then some surgery, and then they'll check all of the facility requirements for achieving those services. So
Okay.
you don't, because technically it's very difficult for them as well, because a lot of the inspectors may not be specifically linked to those services that are being checked. So they can't know all the different quirks about it. So it's about saying broadly, is it inpatient, outpatient? Is it surgery? Is it like, clinics? Is it local anesthetics? Is it kids? Is it adults? And it's about more about the safety side of things, fire regulations, or is like patient confidentiality being like respected, staff feeling safe and everything like that. There's a lot of the softer things that, again, as a doctor, like you'd said previously, you don't really think about, because you just do the front end things and then you walk away. So you at least get the choice to walk away. So interestingly, people like nurses probably know more about it, because they tend to have to do some of these background bits and bobs.
Which is, do you have to set up your own mandatory training for the staff?
Yeah, so I mean, we didn't have to set it up from scratch, but we essentially,
Okay.
there are contractors that you can use to do the mandatory training.
Okay.
So yeah,
Right.
we use them, and everyone just has to show their mandatory trainings achieved and things like that. So yeah, we had quite a few different ones that we
Interesting.
tried as well over the years.
And so you said that it gets built pretty quickly. And if I remember correctly, you said the CQC and all the other regulation checks take a lot more time. So was there a period when everything was built and ready and you had patients ready to go, but you couldn't open because you were still waiting on these approvals?
Yeah. So technically the CQC was meant to get back to us in about, I think, 8 to 10 weeks, I think it was. But it took them like
6 months.
just over 6 months.
Wow.
This was COVID. So, that's part of the reason why. So, we can't kind of fault them. It was the time. And that couldn't be accounted for. But the consequence of that is that it is important to still bear in mind, because the repercussions of COVID are still they still have an effect, where a lot of facilities and lots of regulatory bodies do talk about the effects of COVID, and I think it's just kind of bearing that in mind and accounting for that as part of your costings as well. So to say, look, it may be built, but there's nothing coming in, and you need to be able to sustain the existence of the clinic during that time as well. Mortgage, rent, if you're paying any loans, if you're paying for staff and things like that, accepting that there may not be any money coming in, which is hard.
Yeah. That sounds like a real big challenge, because you've finally gotten to the point where you've decided to just go all in for this. You've found a place, you made some commitments, and then you suddenly just find yourself waiting. And clearly, this is not something. Doesn't sound like a good idea to leave everything and then just do this, hoping that it'll all work. It sounds like you were also still working in the NHS, which I know you were till quite recently, and then you still had other sources of income. For people listening, I think that's just an important thing to consider, that you can build this alongside everything else and really have those patients coming in before you even decide to let go of any other sources of income for yourself. And it sounds like it's really up to you at like what pace you do this on. Like, you don't have to be rushed by anything but your own framework, I guess. Yeah.
I think it's again, this comes down to the pace, comes down to what's your financial capability, and it's a good thing to think about, like you said, Shubh, that it's best not to let go of what you have in terms of like your income, that's your everyday income, and then build this on the side until this kicks off. Don't let go of that. But then again, you have to think about this is going to cost a fair bit of money, so keeping that in mind. So if you take a long time to set it up and build it and get going with it, then you're paying out a lot more than you should be. So it's just, again, it's a personal circumstance thing, and it's about balancing everything.
I think it is that. I think one is finances, but actually I think the other one is the mentality. So a lot of people are prone to saying that they're going to start doing things, but they don't set themselves an end point. So, because I remember, especially early on when I was a registrar, lots of people would be like, "Oh, I haven't started private practice yet. I've been a consultant for a few years. I'm trying to collect all my information for my website." And it's like, a few years to build a website is a long time. If you really set your mind to it, there's no reason why you can't get most of that information, not all of it, but you should get most of that information down in a few months maximum. And I think it's for me, it's very much a mentality. The mentality is the most vital part of all of this. And in that sense, that's one of the important messages I think that people need to bear in mind. Private practice isn't for everyone. Having a facility isn't for everyone. And it does require a certain personality type to be able to do all of those different aspects. So, that's like a really, really heavy part. The other thing with building and running these facilities is, again, you can run things on the side, but you need to have someone that you can completely trust. And that may be, thankfully for me, it was like, Karuna and I. But if you don't, you need to have like a trusted business partner. Our landlord was a massive support. This is what we want to try to build, is that we would be that trusted partner. And I think that's like a really, really important part that you don't really appreciate. This is what I didn't appreciate as a doctor, that it's that part of actually keeping the other things going that is actually more important for success than building a facility, doing the marketing and stuff, because it's a consistency. So, because obviously there was a period whenever, like, Karuna was pregnant with our second child and things like that. So she was out of commission. So I had to do everything. And when you start doing that kind of stuff, that's when it really hits you that I can't, you have to be relentless, And I think that people need to get that you can't go through phases of like, oh, I've got an idea. you try it for a month and then it fails, which because it's not long enough, but it fails, and then you're saying, oh, that's the end of that idea. Let's move on to the next thing. So you never do anything completely, and you don't really give it a chance, and you just keep on moving on to the next thing. So for me, I think is actually the relentlessness is vital, and that's again part of the mentality. Because we went through phases where we'd have different colleagues giving ideas, and even like yourself, you were like saying that let's do this and let's try this, and I was like, no. For example, we just took an ad out in a magazine, and they were like, let's just try it for a month, and I was like, a month is not going to work. Here's a year's subscription. Let's see. It took about 6 months to get it, but in the end, that magazine, for example, was making us a lot of money from compared to what we put in. Proportionally, it was making vast amounts. But you can't know. But at the same time, you can't then say that I just it's not to dabble in terms of like especially the marketing. And I think that itself is a reflection of the overall business. You can't just dabble in it. You know, I think people need to, if they do want to do the business, do it. If you need to take time to build up, that's fine. But when you start to do it, either you work with someone who can definitely do that part, or you need to be willing to commit to the running part fully if you want to be successful. Because a lot of people do end up, they set it up, and there's really commonly found statistics. Everyone can find this on Google. You can see that a lot of businesses fail within the first 3 years, and that's a combination of like, the stress, the money, or the lack of all of this, and then the lack of support. And I think, again, I think it's really important that we help. We are this background, the support, like the backbone, essentially, to be able to give these guys the confidence to say, this is a crap time, undoubtedly, but you can get through it. This is how we're going to get through it, And I think that is like it's like that mentality monster, or like, the beast mode, kind of whatever you want to think. That's how I think.
Big-headedness.
Yeah. Bloody-mindedness is what I would say.
That's very interesting. I mean, I've been writing down as we've gone along, and I've written that, you first learned about the possibility that you could open a clinic. Then you started exploring, you start to think about a budget. By the way, what sort of a budget is necessary really to start? Give us an example for someone who's doing just consultations, or maybe like an internal medicine specialist doing just consultations, and someone like yourself looking at a full GA clinic.
So just consultations can cost like in the thousands. That's it. A few thousand, 10,000. Again, it depends how much you want to splash out. But realistically, you shouldn't really be spending more than 10,000. For the internal fit, if you're going to be renting a space. If you're going to be buying a building, then there's obviously the cost associated with that. But you can realistically do it for well under 100,000. Okay, just broadly. If you're going to do like a local anesthetic facility, then that does require different. It requires some air changes. It requires some the different types of flooring and things like that. So that's probably coming up realistically to at least 100,000. Okay. And then when you're moving on to like, say, sedation, which needs controlled drugs, it requires like special locks, alarms, all of those kind of things, and ventilation, like higher grade ventilation. Then that starts to go up to the few 100,000. And then if you're starting to build like full on like theaters, laminar flow, orthopedic grade stuff, then that can be coming up to, you're close to 1 million, if not more.
Okay. So it really depends. So if someone just wants to get started, they can really start for a couple of £1,000s.
Yeah. And again, part of that is, again, you can do it for that price, but it's about getting the team to negotiate as well, because this is a vital part. As soon as they see that you're a doctor, some people will be like, this is a cash cow, I'm going to milk this. You need to know that you can essentially run it by someone who has your best interest at their heart as well. If you do have someone that you can call on like that, then I think that's where you start to be like, you can do this for a few thousand, whereas others, the same thing can literally cost you 10, 15 times as much for the same type of facilities. And I've seen this. So that's when people start to burn through their cash reserves.
Wow. Okay. So budget smartly, and then you start to look at sites, and then you start to look at the regulations. You finally make the decision to commit, and then put the money in place. You get your partners, you make the build, you get the CQC regulation. But it sounds like that's almost when the actual difficult bit starts of patient acquisition, the vision and the mission of what you're building, the marketing behind it, the staffing, the running of it on a day-to-day basis, whilst still being clinical in other places as well, because you've still got income elsewhere. So that sounds like the challenging bit. And I'd be keen to dive into more of those topics in future videos. We could probably do smaller bits for each of those challenges. So if anyone's listening to this and you have specific questions, put them in the chat below. We're also doing the live event in September. So if anybody wants to come and speak to us in person, ask your own questions, learn more about what the marketing is like to make your clinic successful, learn about the pricing structures, learn about some frameworks that have helped Clinikin be successful, then sign up to the session we've got as well. So the link's in the description for that. But yeah, any last parting words? Thank you so much for sharing the journey of how Clinikin came to be. It's quite exciting. I was kind of going through the ups and downs in there with you, and it sounds like you really need a lot of grit to pull through and make this happen. So it's amazing to have you here, and thank you for sharing this so openly and vulnerably with all of us.
You're welcome. I think it's also like one of the key bits is you don't have to be that bloody minded. As long as you have someone else that you can call on that will be that bloody minded for you is another option. Because that's how it worked for us, isn't it? So it's like I can be difficult. Hopefully not about, I think it's just like, it's about consistency for me. Everything is about consistency. So as long as you build the right team, you can actually become really successful. And it's about identifying your own issues, not issues. What's your shortcomings, and what can you supplement, and who can supplement you in a trusted way. So yeah,
awesome.